Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper, beginning with a news item on page number 1 of the Delhi edition of The Hindu. Serial blasts across Sri Lanka claim 200. The terrorists targeted churches on Easter and other luxury hotels. These attacks are the worst in Sri Lanka since the end of the civil war in the year 2009. Who carried out these attacks? We still do not have any official confirmation. But according to various reports, local jihadi outfits with links to international terror organizations are responsible for this. What is going to be the next step? Possibly, in all likelihood, the President of Sri Lanka is going to declare a nationwide emergency. But from the civil services examination point of view, there are two lessons that we can draw from this dastardly attack. Number one, civil war. What was this civil war? From 1983 onwards, till the year 2009, there was a civil war between the government forces of Sri Lanka and LTTE, Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam. These Tamil Tigers, they wanted separate independent country for Tamils in the northern and eastern part of Sri Lanka. Why? Because they were discriminated against. And one principal cause for discrimination was the language. The Tamil language was discriminated by the Sinhalese majority, and that is why there was a civil war which ended in the year 2009 when the head of the LTTE, Prabhakaran, was also killed. And United Nations report says that one of the worst human rights violations were committed by the Sri Lankan forces in these 2-decade-old civil war. But what about India, and what is the lesson that we can draw from the civil war? Primarily because one language was sought to be imposed on the people of Sri Lanka, that is why there was a civil war. And this civil war lasted for more than 2 decades. Look at Pakistan. The East Pakistan, which is today Bangladesh, the leader of East Pakistan, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, was all set to be appointed as the Prime Minister of Pakistan. But then many people argued, how can a Bengali-speaking Mujibur Rahman become the Prime Minister of the entire Pakistan? And that is why, since language was not respected, Pakistan broke into two and East Pakistan became Bangladesh. That means if we look at our neighborhood, language was not respected in Sri Lanka, the minority language was not respected in Sri Lanka, and there was a civil war. One language, Bengali, was not respected in Pakistan, and despite the fact that Pakistan was created in the name of religion, even this common religion could not bind two Pakistans together, and ultimately Pakistan got split into Pakistan and Bangladesh. What about India? When India got independence, there were many people who argued that the reorganization of this country should be done on linguistic lines. That means we should create more and more states in India on the basis of language. But Indian policymakers thought that we should not create states, we should not reorganize this country in the name of language, because if we do that, the country will be balkanized. If we do that, these smaller states will come out of the Indian Union. That means Indian Union will become very weak. But then in 1953, Andhra became the first state in India to be carved out on the basis of language. And then from 1956 onwards, we have seen many states have been created, carved out in India, primarily on the basis of language. This is the beauty of Indian experiment. Despite the fact that Indian states were reorganized on the lines of language, we are still united. And that is one lesson that we can draw from this entire episode. Language is a very emotional issue, and we should not be imposing one language on all the people of this country, and that will be detrimental to the unity and integrity of this nation. We should respect every language and equally promote all languages. So all those who want to impose Hindi on the unwilling population of South India should desist from this. That is one message that we can draw from this newspaper article. Second, after these attacks in Sri Lanka, the access to social media platforms including WhatsApp and Viber blocked. And this is the lesson that Indian authorities should also learn. God forbid, if you are a believer in God, if tomorrow there is a terror attack, After the terror attack, there are always misinformations, ill informations, fake news broadcast, generated, distributed across these social media platforms. So there is an external enemy who is targeting the inside of India, and then these social media platforms, they become a potential recipe for disaster. They become an internal security problem for us. That is why after a terror attack, there should be a coordinated mechanism that access to social media, social networking sites should be blocked. Misinformation campaign, fake news is tackled, and nobody is given an opportunity to vitiate the atmosphere and take undue advantage of this terror attack. That is what we need to understand from this newspaper article. Now let's look at another news on page number 1. Whenever there is a terror attack in India and whenever the government of India talks tough, Pakistan resorts to nuclear blackmail. That if you attack us, we have nuclear weapons and we are going to attack you. Now the Prime Minister has said, is our nuclear bomb for Diwali? But from the civil services examination point of view, there are few other things that we need to understand. What is India's nuclear doctrine? Our nuclear doctrine is no first use. That means India will not be the first country to use nuclear weapons. But if we are attacked with nuclear weapons, then we have no other option but to retaliate, and we will retaliate using these nuclear weapons. What about other countries? Apart from India, China is the other country which also has a no first use doctrine. They have also declared that they are not going to be the first ones to use the nuclear weapons when they are attacked. What about the other countries? If we look at Russia, if we look at Pakistan, if we look at United States, they do not follow no first use policy. In fact, their policy is that they can use nuclear weapons for the first time even if the enemy has not resorted to nuclear weapons. So they believe that for nuclear deterrence, it is better not to have a no first use policy, but to have a policy of using nuclear weapons for the first time, even if they are not attacked with the nuclear weapons. United States nuclear doctrine, which was revised in the year 2010, makes few additions. United States doctrine says that we will use nuclear weapons for the first time, but we will not use these nuclear weapons against those states which do not have nuclear weapons. So we will not use nuclear weapons against those states which are not in possession of the nuclear weapons, and we will also not use nuclear weapons against those countries who are signatories to Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT. What about Israel? Israel has a very ambiguous nuclear policy. Number one, they do not accept that they have nuclear weapons. So there is no question of asking what is their nuclear doctrine. If tomorrow Israel says that our doctrine is no first use, that means we will not use nuclear weapons for the first time. That means it is an admission that they have nuclear weapons. Till date, Israel has not declared whether they are in possession of nuclear weapons or not. But world knows that Israel is in possession of nuclear weapons, but their nuclear doctrine is ambiguous. We do not know. So tomorrow there can be a match the following type question in your prelims examination. So you have to match these countries along with their nuclear doctrines. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. Now let's look at another news on page number 7, primarily relevant for your prelims. In a first, East Asian birds make Andaman stopover. Which are these birds? Number 1, Horsefield's bronze cuckoo. And this bird is a native of Australia and New Guinea. Then we have Javan pond heron. It is usually found in Thailand and Cambodia. And this bird is larger than bronze cuckoo. Then we have Zappy's flycatcher. It breeds in China and then spends the winters in Sumatra, Java, so on and so forth. And they were spotted in Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So again, in match the following type questions, this can be a potential question in your prelims examination. One more detail from the prelims perspective. These birds, they use Andaman and Nicobar Islands for a few week rest. before they can fly along the East Asian Australasian flyway. This flyway extends from Arctic Russia and North America to the South Australian boundaries and includes most Asian regions including Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Now let's look at some of the editorials and columns from today's newspaper. First up, a column written by former Chief Election Commissioner Mr. Naveen Chawla. And the arguments, the points raised by Mr. Naveen Chawla, we have discussed them many a times in the past. But very briefly, let me summarize them. Number one, huge quantities of cash have been discovered by the election officials. According to various estimates, 2019 election is going to be the most expensive election in the history of independent India, and close to 50,000 crore rupees are going to be spent in these elections. But what about the limit that is imposed by the Representation of the People's Act on the political spending? In a Lok Sabha constituency, a candidate cannot spend more than 70 lakh. And if 70 lakh into 543 constituencies are taken into account, it will not equate 50,000 crore. That means clearly candidates and political parties are spending more than the limit prescribed by the law. If there is a limit on the candidate spending the money, there should also be a limit on the political parties. There should also be a limit on the amount of money being spent by the political parties in the elections. That's number one. Number two, we have witnessed blatant violations of Model Code of Conduct, and we have discussed most of these violations in our daily newspaper analysis. But what Mr. Naveen Chawla argues, that once the election is over, after the elections are over, then the Election Commission need to take stock of various issues, such as the violation of Model Code of Conduct, so that we can have an elaborate policy in place, so that these violations will not recur in the subsequent elections. And number two, the funding. Because if we look at electoral bonds, the funding through electoral bonds is anonymous. Mr. Naveen Chawla raises another issue. In the 16th Lok Sabha, 30% of the members of the Lok Sabha, they had declared criminal cases against them. And in the current elections, in the candidates contesting the first phase of polls, 12% declared criminal cases. In the second phase, 11% of the candidates, they declared criminal cases pending against them. And this is another issue that we will have to tackle. But Mr. Naveen Chawla argues that amidst all this, there is one big development that we all need to applaud, and that is the decision of the Trinamool Congress as well as the BJD of Naveen Patnaik, because these two political parties have decided that more than 33% of their candidates will be women, will be female candidates. In fact, Mamata Banerjee's party, 41% of the candidates are women and 33% of the candidates of BJD are women candidates. And that is what needs to be applauded according to Mr. Naveen Chawla. Now let us look at an editorial in his own case, and we will understand this editorial in great detail. Chief Justice of India is the master of the roster. And what do we mean by that? That means whenever cases are filed in the Supreme Court, Chief Justice of India decides that, let's say for example, land acquisition cases will be heard by judges A and B. Public interest litigations will be heard by Chief Justice of India and Judge C. Election petition related cases will be heard by judges D and E. That means allocating cases to various judges of the Supreme Court, that is the job, that is the task of the Chief Justice of India, and that is what we call Chief Justice of India being the master of the roster. And this is a well settled convention now, that indeed this is the power of the Chief Justice of India allocating various cases to different judges of the Supreme Court. If you have understood this, let me take you to Uttar Pradesh. There is a medical college in Uttar Pradesh. It was barred by the Medical Council of India that you should not carry on with the admissions. Why? Because there are some irregularities. Then this medical college paid bribe and bribed few individuals so that this medical college can get a favorable order from the Supreme Court of India. so that Supreme Court of India can allow this medical college to go ahead with the admissions. Ultimately, when this case was heard by the Supreme Court of India, Supreme Court overturned the ruling of the Medical Council of India and allowed this medical college to continue with the admission formalities. And the judge who heard this case was Justice Deepak Misra. And Justice Deepak Misra later on became the Chief Justice of India. Then when these bribery allegations surfaced, a public interest litigation was filed in the Supreme Court asking the Supreme Court that there should be an independent investigation into these bribery allegations. We have to prove whether this medical college paid bribes to the judges of the Supreme Court to get a favorable judgment from the Supreme Court. We have to have an independent investigation. Since the needle of suspicion pointed to Justice Deepak Misra because he heard this case, and now Justice Deepak Misra is the Chief Justice of India, Chief Justice of India, being the master of the roster, decided that this PIL will be heard by Judge A, B and C. The petitioner argued that Justice Deepak Misra should not decide who will hear this case. Justice Deepak Misra should not use the power of being the master of the roster because the needle of suspicion points to Justice Deepak Misra himself. But these judges dismissed this public interest litigation and said no investigation is required. And many people argued that Justice Deepak Misra, who is now the Chief Justice of India, has violated one of the brilliant principles of natural justice, which is no one shall be the judge in his own case. There was another allegation against Justice Deepak Misra, that Justice Deepak Misra is allocating cases of significant nature, cases of having far-reaching consequences to junior judges of the Supreme Court. And 4 senior most judges of the Supreme Court, they are allotted insignificant cases. That means what Chief Justice of India is doing, misusing his powers of being the master of the roster, not allocating significant cases to 4 senior most judges of the Supreme Court, but instead allocating these cases of having far-reaching consequences to junior judges of the Supreme Court. Then what happened? These 4 senior most judges of the Supreme Court, they gave a press conference. A much publicized, unprecedented press conference wherein these 4 senior most judges of the Supreme Court alleged that Chief Justice of India, Justice Deepak Misra, is misusing his powers of being the master of the roster, is neglecting 4 senior most judges of the Supreme Court, is allocating cases of significant nature to junior judges, and Justice Deepak Misra has also violated a principle of natural justice, which is no one shall be the judge in his own case. One of these 4 senior most judges was Justice Ranjan Gogoi, who is now the Chief Justice of India. And what Mr. Ranjan Gogoi accused Deepak Misra of, today the same accusations are leveled against Justice Ranjan Gogoi as well. How? A lady clerk who worked at the Supreme Court of India, briefly worked at the residence of the Chief Justice of India as well. She leveled sexual harassment allegations against the Chief Justice of India, Justice Ranjan Gogoi. Then what happened? Justice Ranjan Gogoi, along with 2 other judges, they sat together to discuss this particular allegation, wherein Justice Ranjan Gogoi blasted the complainant, refuted all the allegations against him, but then he decided that I will not issue any judgment, but these 2 other judges will issue any judgment or any order if that is required. But today critics are arguing, how can Justice Ranjan Gogoi preside over a sitting of Indian Supreme Court along with 2 other judges of the Supreme Court? Is it not the violation of principle of natural justice, which is no one shall be the judge in his own case? That's point number 1. Point number 2, Ranjan Gogoi did not involve 2 senior most judges of the Supreme Court. In fact, 2 senior most judges of the Supreme Court below the Chief Justice of India, they were not part of this judge panel. Why were they not consulted? That's another allegation. Third allegation is that this particular case should not have been dealt from the judicial side, but instead should have been dealt from the administrative side. And what is this judicial side and administrative side? Judicial side, basically the judges sitting together and deciding upon a particular issue, hearing a particular case. But on the administrative side, there is a committee of the Supreme Court. There is a gender sensitization committee of the Supreme Court which looks into sexual harassment allegations. This case should have been referred to that gender sensitization committee instead of Chief Justice of India and two other judges of the Supreme Court dismissing these allegations and claiming that democracy is in danger, the independence of judiciary is in danger. And ironically, no woman judge was part of this panel. And that is what this newspaper editorial talks about. The Chief Justice of India shows how not to deal with a sexual harassment complaint. Now, it can be true that this allegation against the Chief Justice of India may be false, may be inaccurate, and may be a deliberate attempt to force the Chief Justice of India to resign. But there is a way to deal with these sexual harassment allegations. No one shall be the judge in his own case. And hilariously or ironically, when these judges were asked by the petitioner in this PIL application that how can you decide whether this case is to be dismissed or not because you have been set up by the Chief Justice of India and the needle of suspicion points to Chief Justice of India. So Chief Justice of India should not have constituted this bench to hear this public interest litigation. These judges said that this principle of natural justice, that no one shall be the judge in his own case, this principle does not apply to the Chief Justice of India. And this is what many people argue smacks of judicial hypocrisy. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. Now let's look at another column on page number 9. This is regarding the Forest Rights Act and the draft amendments to the Forest Rights Act, which we have discussed in the past, twice in the past. But this is primarily relevant for your mains examination. Once the prelims is over, then we will come up with an elaborate discussion, more than an hour-long video on the entire history of this forest right in this country. So please wait for that. Now there is another article on page number 9, Doordarshan's partiality. This article is written by CPI leader. If we look at political parties in India, there are two sets of political parties. There are recognized political parties and there are registered political parties. Any party, if it wants to contest an election, it has to register itself with Election Commission of India. And over a period of time, some of these registered political parties, they are recognized by the Election Commission of India, recognized as national party or a state party. And when a political party is recognized as a state party or a national party, it has some benefits. One such benefit is free airtime is given to these political parties on Doordarshan and All India Radio. But now the CPI leader argues that Doordarshan has been partial. Doordarshan is allocating more airtime to the ruling political party and is violating the level playing field when it comes to allocating airtime to the political parties. Mr. Binoy Viswam argues that for a month after the elections were announced, the BJP got 160 hours of coverage, the Congress got 60 hours of coverage, and the CPIM got only 8 hours of coverage. And let's say, for example, I belong to a recognized political party. Can I use Doordarshan to give a political speech? Yes. But before I can give this speech, my political speech is to be verified, so that this political speech does not contain criticism of other countries, so that my speech is not attack on any religious community, so that I do not cast aspersions on the president or the judiciary, or I do not commit contempt of court. It is for these reasons that this speech is first verified by a committee of the Doordarshan. But when the CPI leader presented his speech to be verified by the Doordarshan's committee, the committee said that you have to drop reference to RSS. And that is why this newspaper column argues that Doordarshan has been partial in favor of the ruling political party and is not allowing a level playing field for all the recognized political parties in this country. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. Now let's look at some of the prelims based questions. Number 1, Bhasha Sangam program, which is a part of Ek Bharat Shresth Bharat, It is an initiative of which of the following? It's an initiative of Ministry of Human Resource Development, because through this program the students are made aware about the cultural, ethnic and linguistic diversity that is found in India. Second, which among the following countries has recently installed world's first floating nuclear plant? It is Russia. Third, which of the following states of India has recently criminalized sextortion by public servants? And what is this sextortion? Public servants should not sexually abuse, should not demand sexual favors from their subordinates. And if you do that, you can be booked for sextortion. And which of the following states recently criminalized sextortion? Jammu and Kashmir. Fourth, with reference to commercial hunting of whales and its regulations, consider the following statements. India is not a member of the International Whaling Commission. Wrong, India is a member. The headquarters of the International Whaling Commission is in England. Correct. India is considering a withdrawal from International Whaling Commission in order to resume commercial whaling. This statement is wrong because it is Japan which is considering withdrawal from this International Whaling Commission. So which of the above statements are correct? A, two only. The last question, with reference to Serious Fraud Investigation Office, consider the following statements. SFIO is a statutory body under the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. Correct. SFIO also enjoys the power to make arrest under the Companies Act of 2013. Correct. Both these statements are correct. That is it from our newspaper analysis for today. Thank you for being with us. Have a great day.